4, 3, 2, 1.
Take off.
Ladies and gentlemen, we are very happy to be here at the very center of Israeli vibrant and sometimes noisy democracy, Knesset. Today, I think that we have a real cross-section of opinions, so it should be very interesting to hear what everyone has to say. We have the new coalition MKs, we have the new opposition. You know, you came at this particular time with a special timing that we don't know exactly. We might hear from a very senior MK from the Likud party when is there going to be the new government. But in the meantime, it's really a pleasure for me to introduce MK Yuli Yoel Edelstein from the Likud party. And he's actually perhaps one of our most famous members, parliament, having held of many major ministerial positions in the Knesset, including, of course, Speaker of this House. As a former president of Zion, he has and continues to fight forcefully for the rights of immigrants to Israel under the right of return, and is vocal in his rejection of any change to the so-called grandfather law, allowing immigrants into Israel if they have one Jewish grandparents, a quite big issue at this particular time. He is also in favor of repealing in the 2005 disengagement law, which will allow people to return to Chomesh, which was advocated at the time, another sensation topic. And if I can add something in personal, he was the Minister of Public Diplomacy, very good one, that we use him very much in terms of the Asbara issue. And he actually was appointed me as a GPO director 10 years ago. So all the complaints, you can go to him. It's a great pleasure to introduce Mr. MK Yuli Yoel Edelstein. My pleasure. The microphone is yours.
Thank you. Nobody's perfect. Sometimes we make mistakes with appointments. Welcome. I don't know, when I used to be the Speaker of the House, I could say welcome officially to every group. These days, it's a personal welcome. I do have to say that before Knesset, before politics, I used to work in an educational institution where the boss always said lecturing is answering questions no one has asked you. So I'm not going to lecture. I think that you have topics that you would like to discuss. I'll just say that you are definitely here during very interesting times, including what Nitzan just mentioned, that the temporary Speaker of the House asked me during the plenary session a couple of days ago whether I have a good advice for him, whom to call coalition and whom to call opposition, because there is the incoming coalition and outgoing coalition, and there's a whole mess with all these issues. But definitely we are now in a very interesting period. On the one hand, there was we can say a landslide victory of the right religious coalition with 64 seats, many more than predicted. And on the other hand, there are difficulties in forming the new coalition and the new government. I don't have the exact answer to the question when the government will be formed, but rumor has it that it's going to happen on January 2nd. So you still have time to think about it, write about it, report about it. But no one knows exactly. I sincerely hope that things will somehow fall in the right place and the government will start working, because now, without a smile, I will say that for any country, and definitely for Israel, it's a very unhealthy period when the outgoing government already feels that it's not in charge and not responsible. They even don't have cabinet meetings anymore. And on the other hand, the incoming government hasn't taken the positions. And I think that this is a situation that ideally should have been much shorter than what we are witnessing right now. In the Knesset, the challenges stay the same. I think that during my 7 years as a speaker, I was most of the time worried about the, shall we say, the independence of the Knesset as far as the government is concerned, as far as the Supreme Court is concerned. And the challenges stay the same for this new Knesset. And I think that we should always remember that in our system, in the Israeli system, the Knesset is the body that is actually being elected. No one voted in the elections on November 1st for someone to be in this or that ministerial position. Everyone was elected a member of Knesset. So we have to keep it in mind. The will of the people is reflected here in the Knesset. Everyone is represented, sometimes in the coalition, sometimes in the opposition, but the voices are heard right here, and we should always keep in mind that the Knesset should be really the sovereign in this country, not too dependent on the government, not too dependent on the decisions of the Supreme Court, and do the job for the benefit of the Israeli people. I'll stop right here in order to enable you to ask on any topic or suggest something that you want to suggest. Nisan, are you going to run it? Or
Yes, please. Please introduce yourself. What country? Please.
Thank you. I'm Maxine Jover from Manhattan. I'm Maxine Jover from Manhattan, New York, the United States. My platform is jewishviews.com. We focus on an international Jewish community and the views of that community. I'm going to ask a non-Jewish question, which I think will be very, very important in the way Israelis handle Israelis, which is, what do you think this coalition will do about the national law and the position of the Druze community within the formation of Israeli society?
I don't think that this coalition is going to change so-called Chok HaLeom, the national law. I do have to say that I voted for it wholeheartedly. There was a very successful campaign, successful inverted commas, I guess, successful campaign explaining that this law is against the Druze community that is loyal to the state. It has nothing to do with the Druze community. It stresses the Jewishness of the state of Israel. We just marked Kaftet B'November, the 29th of November. As far as I can remember, the United Nations then created a Jewish state here in Palestine, and that's the essence of this state. Now, one may ask, and that was the question asked, who the heck needs a law? It's so obvious. It's a Jewish democratic state. Why law? Why legislation? I think that we are here. I won't enter this whole debate, but we have to understand that today we live in a different world. There is no more winking of the eyes saying, we understand it's a Jewish state. If I were a judge of the Supreme Court, and lots of decisions would have been brought to my door, like, once again, I don't want to go into too many details, but the Ka'adan case that discussed the right of an Arab family to buy property, to buy a house in a closed Jewish community in the north, not in Judea and Samaria, in the north, and many other cases. I would feel, as I've said, if I would be an imaginary Supreme Court judge, I would feel that I have a very good legal basis in terms of the state of Israel being a democratic state. We have well-developed basic laws in this field, and I don't think that we have anything, on the other hand, that confirms in terms of legislation, legally, our being a Jewish state. And as I've said, in the modern world, it's a problematic situation. That's why I think that there is a perfect place in the Israeli book of legislation, a legislation code, for a law like the Chok HaLeom, like the national law, and I don't think the present coalition is going to change anything about it.
Just a bit of a follow-up. Is there the opportunity to assure the Druze community that this is in fact not a law against their full rights as Israeli citizens?
There were different suggestions of legislation dealing specifically with the Druze community. I, for one, don't have anything against it, but I don't know whether it will be promoted in this incoming Knesset. As I've said, it was a PR campaign. I don't think it was anything more than that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, please. The gentleman with, okay. No, he was before you. Okay. Please.
David Koschke from the Jüdische Allgemeine, Berlin, Germany.
From?
Berlin, Germany. It's a question after we heard yesterday Minister Shai and Minister Gantz that told us that the new government, the new coalition will have a very, very bad impact on the connection to the diaspora. So what's your opinion about it? How will the development of the connection to the diaspora will be?
I will put it like that. There are many people in the incoming coalition who don't understand the sensitivity of Israel-diaspora relations. I mean, not nice to badmouth your colleagues, but as I've said, many new members of Knesset who are not sensitive enough to different issues just because they don't understand it. It doesn't mean that the coalition will act accordingly. And a good example that has been just given to you by Nitzan is the demand to change the law of return. When I said in this house during the plenary session on so-called Aliyah Day that I will do everything in my power not to let anyone change the law of return or touch the law of return, I was very worried. The reason I went out to speak about it was because I kind of got this impression that, you know, in several months, give or take a week or two, the law of return could be changed, and then it will be, we will start the ball rolling. My concern was not this specific paragraph, grandchildren or no grandchildren. My concern was that in several years from now, we won't have the law of return at all in the state of Israel because there are a lot of elements on both sides. They don't like the law of return. Some because it's too liberal, some because it's whatever, discriminating, you name it. So there will be a strange alliance of those who don't like it because it's too liberal and too many non-Jews can join, and those who hate it because, I don't know, Ahmed can't come here according to the law of return and so on and so forth, and we will stay without the law of return. I'm less worried now because during these 2 weeks, it kind of is already clear that unfortunately the discussion will continue, but fortunately I think it will be a fruitless discussion in practical terms. So I sincerely hope that with many of the statements that we hear, and I have a lot of conversations with the new members of Knesset and the incoming coalition trying to explain the sensitivity, as I've said, of the relations with the diaspora. I am Orthodox myself. I have my own views. I, let's say, have my own limits in terms where I participate, what kind of prayer I can participate, and sometimes it's not very nice not to be able to attend someone's bar mitzvah because there is a prayer that I can't be part of according, once again, to my personal views. But there should always be the understanding that Jews are of different persuasions these days, and if we want to talk to each other and not to lose each other, it's very important first to learn things and B, to act accordingly.
Last question, please. No, you.
Hi, my name is Ron East. I'm from Canada. I have a website called the J.ca where we do digital newspaper. My question is, today we've had a lot of discussion in our group, some heated discussions in regards to the rise of anti-Semitism in the diaspora and what should be the role that Israel plays or doesn't play in helping the communities outside of Israel to deal with and to defend not only their own communities, but to defend the state of Israel against the rise of anti-Semitism, BDS, anti-Zionism. I want to know your point of view of what you think the government of Israel should or shouldn't do, how it should or shouldn't act, what it should give or not give to the diaspora in order to help those of us out there who are doing what we call hasbara, on behalf of the state of Israel to provide us more ammunition, more logistics, maybe financial support, whatever it can be, because we are really, all of us here, the journalists, on the front line of doing that hasbara on behalf of the country. And I think I could speak for all of us, saying that we do it with a passion and with a love for the state of Israel, with a love for Judaism and for a love of our community. But sometimes we feel that we're out there on our own fighting this fight without much support, not only from our own community at home, but also from the Israeli government here. Thank you very much.
Well, I totally agree with your basic assumption. I think it's our mutual challenge and mutual task, especially because of the fact that even today, with this total freedom of speech and you name it, and with social networks, it's still kind of unpopular, or people feel ill at ease to be openly anti-Semitic. But to be openly anti-Zionist or anti-Israeli is totally legit. So to say that Jews drink blood of Christian children is definitely something that is not done, but Israeli soldiers that drink blood of Palestinian children is totally okay. So I think that here, as I've said, it's our mutual task. I, for one, when I was Minister of Public Diplomacy and Diaspora Affairs, was trying to run and did run joint projects even with different diaspora communities in the field of anti-Semitism. I think that here I disagree a little bit. I think that those who followed, like for example, in the previous government, Minister of Strategic Affairs, then Gilad Erdan, did a lot in terms of combating anti-Semitism, also through different projects and following up on different expressions of anti-Semitism, both by governments and public figures and so on and so forth. But we always have to keep in mind that hasbara here is very important. And by the way, not necessarily just hasbara in terms of, hey, guys, you're wrong. Israeli soldiers don't drink blood of Palestinian children and so on and so forth. Israeli soldiers are very moral. But there are, I think, smarter ways of hasbara, just presenting Israel differently, explaining Israel differently. I think is no less important because stigmas are still there. And the last but never least, we always have to keep in mind that anti-Semitism was there long before any of us was born, and unfortunately will be there after Achrei 120, after we are 120 years old and go to the better world, and still there will be anti-Semitism. It doesn't mean that we have to be forgiving. It doesn't mean that we have to understand or accept anti-Semitism, but we always must be in proportion in terms of what kind of success we may have. And the last but never least, which is very relevant, I'm talking about democratic countries where we combat anti-Semitism. Unfortunately, and I had this experience, this very sad experience with some Jewish communities where they would come to me and talk to me about combating and this and that, and I would just say to them, I don't understand what you guys are still doing there. I mean, it's not a regime where you can continue pretending that there is some kind of a dialogue, and if we confront the anti-Semites, you know, so we have to divide between different countries and different regimes. Sharon, and there I think it's very important just to think how we get the Jews out as quickly as possible, because, you know, sending right messages on social networks is not exactly what's going to protect them. Thank you very much. My colleague will continue from here. I want to thank you for being here and for everything you are doing on behalf of your Jewish communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, MK Yuli Edelstein. We will let him go lighting Hanukkah candles. Thank you very much. Our next speaker, member of the Knesset, Sharren Haskel, is a member of the National Unity Party in the 25th Knesset. She served as a chair of the Knesset Education, Culture and Sport Committee and chair of the Special Committee for the bill to regulate the use of the cannabis for medical purposes. we can, yes, she deserves it, she deserves it. And many other advantages, but I will let her introduce, instead of I will introduce, please welcome member of the Knesset, Sharren Haskel.
Thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here today with you all. I want to welcome you to Israel. Welcome to Jerusalem, capital of the state of Israel, where for 2,186 years ago, the Maccabees, a group of courageous Jews who liberated the Jewish state in the land of Israel, fought for independence, retook Jerusalem, and rededicated the temple during these very days. Since that time, Jews have been celebrating that victory during these days of Hanukkah. For most of these 2,000 years, we celebrated with nostalgia for the time when Jews had been able to determine their own destiny and be sovereign in their own land. Now, for the last 74 years, we are reliving the miracle of Hanukkah here in Israel every single day. We came here with our dreams, with 2,000 years of hope. The light that those Hanukkah candles symbolize was never extinguished. We came back and we fought and we won. And we reestablished a Jewish sovereign nation in the land of Israel. For the first time since the Maccabees, we are here, once again, Am Chofshi Be'artzenu, a free people in our land. I am the daughter of an immigrant mother whose family fled from Morocco, where they lived for generations until the establishment of Israel, when Jews became persecuted and her family moved to France. My father was born here in Israel. His family immigrated from Germany to help fight for the foundation of Israel. I was born in Canada, grew up in Israel, and spent much of my 20s in Australia. This short family history, perhaps it includes a country you are from, is like the stories of most Israelis, a kaleidoscope of countries' experiences of Jewish grandparents and great-grandparents, moving from place to place, sometimes to escape anti-Semitism, sometimes in search of a better life. Until we returned to the place we always knew was home. And what a home it is. Noisy, argumentative, energetic, united, fractious, dangerous, safe. One big happy, except when it isn't, family. Yes. There were some contradictions regarding residing together in that description of this country, this family. You can see it on display here in the Knesset. Come to a session of the plenary. We are succeeding tremendously, but we are also in a period of turmoil, politically and regionally. I believe in the right of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. I believe in peace, but only with those who accept you as you define yourself, which is to say, those who accept the Jewish people's right to self-determination. I believe in free markets and less government bureaucracy and interference in free enterprise. For almost every term here in the Knesset for the past 7 years, I received an award for being the most liberal Knesset member here. I am the classic liberal Knesset member. As a classic liberal, I believe strongly in individual liberties. I believe there is a social contract between citizens and state in which, at the expense of some individual liberties, the state provides the individual with safety and law and order. The government must uphold its part of the bargain. Above all, that it respect the freedom of its citizens and the rule of law. That is part of the reason why I left the Likud party with several colleagues, because I felt it was no longer living up to the principles and, more importantly, the spirits of its founder, that the national interest always come before personal interest, that we serve by example and with dignity, and most importantly, that we constantly work to a more unified society. There were two other periods of Jewish sovereignty in the land of Israel: the United Kingdoms of Israel under King David and Solomon, until the kingdom split under Solomon's son, and under the Maccabees. Both lasted 80 years. We will celebrate our 75th year of independence in May. That is a true miracle, but in the historical perspective, it is a sobering reminder to us that nothing should be taken for granted. Alongside the challenges we faced from within, we also faced challenges from without. Palestinian terrorists killed more than 25 Israelis this year, the largest number of Israelis' fatalities in years. The Palestinians find themselves caught between a weak and corrupt Palestinian Authority, which is getting weaker and more corrupt, and an Islamic fundamentalist Hamas, whose main focus in jihad against Israel. Neither the PA or Hamas are willing to accept a Jewish state within any border. So the Palestinian people suffer, as we are attacked by terrorists. The police and the border police, men and women you see patrol the streets here in Jerusalem and everywhere else in the country, often are the buffer between a terrorist with a gun or knife and people literally walking in the streets. I know what it is like because I was one of them. 20 years ago, during the height of the Palestinian suicide bombing, I was a young commander in the border police. I know the feeling of being there. Then there is a regional power which openly calls for our destruction and is now on the verge of attaining a nuclear weapon, the Islamic Republic of Iran. That evil regime is beginning to be held accountable by its own people. Words cannot express the respect I have for women and girls of Iran taking to the streets, risking their own lives. They're literally risking their own lives to demand the freedom to decide for themselves how to live their life. Over 450 Iranians, including 50 children, have been killed and murdered and thousands wounded and arrested because they are demanding basic human rights and freedom. I don't think we in the West are doing enough to show our solidarity with and to support the Iranian people, mainly women and children. I believe Western governments need to stand firmly and decisively in words and in deeds with the Iranian people in support of their legitimate protest and to ultimately help them attain the freedom which they so deserve. Demand that your countries impose sanctions on those who are murdering and abusing their citizens. Demand the UN investigate what is happening. As a member of the press, you have a particular important role to publicize their stories. Since the foundation of the State of Israel till today, there have been those who have tried and are still trying to destroy our nation, to delegitimize Israel, and to deny our right to exist as the homeland of the Jewish people. Most of the time, this effort was made and continued through the violence of war and terrorism. But as this has proved ineffective, so today it comes in the form of non-violent civic protest under the slogan, "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free." The slogan is so seamless that you could hear it chanted in Tehran or Gaza, at the streets, protests in Europe, or on universities and campuses in the United States. And this attitude of a better world without Israel is slowly gaining ground into the West. It says the state of Israel was conceived in sin, the sin of colonialism, the sin of occupation. Britain, France, the other departed, only Israel remains. It negates Jewish history. It negates our 3,000-year-old connection to and presence in this land. And it negates us, Jews, not as religion, but as a people. There is plenty of room for criticizing Israel and critiquing its policies, just as there is a place for a critic of every country. Discrimination in Israel exists, just as it does exist in every other country. This is all totally legitimate. But there is another hardcore group which doesn't want a negotiated solution to the conflict, which doesn't want to see real peace and cooperation between Israelis and Palestinians even, which rejects the right to Jews, which rejects the rights Jews to a homeland anywhere in Israel. To this group, the question needs to be asked: if the French have the right to France as their national home, the Turks to Turkey, and the Palestinians to Palestine, why not the Jews? Why Jews are so different? What will be of Jews when Palestine is free from the river to the sea? Why are the Jews uniquely denied the right to self-determination and a sovereign state of their own? Here is where moral double standard and new anti-Semitism are evident. Not the in-your-face anti-Semitism of the far right, which is clear and present and growing danger, and by all means the most violent form of anti-Semitism. But this is another form of anti-Semitism in the guise of anti-Zionism, which is targeting Jewish students on university campuses in North America, demanding they, simply by virtue of their being Jewish, denounce Israel as a precondition for being social activists. None of this is news for many of you. You are there and you are living it. Some of you have children in colleges. This is a threat unlike any that the state of Israel has faced before, and the Jewish people living outside the state of Israel are on its, and the Jewish people living outside of Israel are on its front lines. I spoke earlier of the need for unity. That unity includes unity with our brothers and sisters, the Jewish people living abroad. To those of you who say the new government in Israel is not making our life easier, I, now a member of the opposition, says the following. We are the pioneers, the ones who came here. Every individual, every family that comes here pays a certain price. Our children serves in the army. As a mother, I know that my 3 little babies will one day serve their countries, perhaps patrolling the streets of Jerusalem as I did, keeping people safe from terrorists. And that's why we Israeli have earned the right to vote, and a right we have exercised many times recently. And that's why we will elect those who represent us, and we will forge our destiny here. At the same time, we also have an obligation to our Jewish brothers and sisters wherever they are. Israel is your home, just as it is my home, just as it was to my mother living in France before she moved here to Israel. And we must listen and respect you. And if this government should consider for a moment to make any changes in the law of return, that law which guarantees that this is your home, it must be done in full consultation with representatives of the Jewish people living abroad. Because we have a responsibility, a contract with the Jewish people that you will always have a home here in Israel. And if, unfortunately, the new government should consider even the smallest change in that contract, we should only do that after we have sat together and discussed it with you. And you have my word, and not just mine, that you are our brothers and sisters, and this will always be your home. For all these challenges, we are nonetheless witnessing a miracle. We like to say Israel is a startup nation, and it certainly is a high-tech powerhouse. But Israel is also a startup nation in the most fundamental way. It was brought into existence by people who had a big idea and big dreams, and who were not going to let anything stop them from turning that idea into reality. And just like a startup, we've now grown into a company, a fully fledged first world country. Who would have believed 150 years ago, when Tel Aviv was a sand dune, that it would be ranked the most expensive city in the world last year by The Economist? On our svivonim, or dreidels, for Hanukkah, here in Israel, we use the version Nes Gadol Haya Po. A great miracle happened here. And indeed it did. But in truth, it isn't just the past. We should celebrate. It is the present. We should be celebrating as well. Nes Gadol Kore Po. A great miracle is happening here. Chag Chanukah Sameach to all of you. Thank you.
MK Sharon Scan will take two questions. You ask me, okay.
It's not so much a question, I just want to raise a point.
Just 1 second. Kobi, tell me what we could.
You'll be able to hear me. You mentioned anti-Semitism on campus in North America. You neglected to mention the UK, where this is a very, very serious problem indeed.
Yeah, I think I may have put Europe as well. Maybe I skipped it within.
No, you said Europe.
I mentioned Europe, I made sure, and I know how grave it is. I have many members of my family, my grandparents and cousins living in France, in Norway. I've been to many delegations in England, in many more places, and I see it, I live it. I see the protests outside when I come and speak. And you know, even I think last week in the UK, Dan Meridor came, and there was, not last week, but a couple of weeks ago, and there were massive protests outside. Now, Dan Meridor is already on the very side of, like you would say, of negotiating with Palestinians and things like that. I'm on another side of the map as well, and it's sad, but that's it. This is a new form of anti-Semitism.
Hi, Mayan. We know each other.
Shalom, yeah, of course.
So my first question is, Yuli Edelstein mentioned that by January 2nd, potentially, we would have a new government, potentially. I'm wondering how long it will take to bring the government down, from your perspective. And I'm also wondering, you know, how the fact that there are actually no prominent women in Likud right now to represent the state of Israel who can talk to the world, and that is slated to be the largest party. How do you think that's going to impact our standing in the world, going from so many prominent women to so few?
Yeah, look, I'm really worried about the upcoming government. I mean, we will fight a lot of the bad legislation, especially legislation that's going to minimize individual liberties, economical liberties. We've been fighting so hard during the past year to expand them and to give more opportunities and liberties to the citizens of Israel, to our country. And any kind of legislations that is going to change that, we're going to fight it with all of our forces. On the other hand, look, they have a big majority, in Israel it's considered a big majority, and people had put their votes in, and this is a political, decision that we accept. And they will find a cooperation on good things, things that will benefit our country and our people, security issues. Of course, we will cooperate. We are not in opposition to the country, but we're here to do good things. And, this coalition seems to form and be more a religious coalition. And as a woman, as a mother for 3 babies, I had twin girls just not 4 months ago as well. So it's not easy. I'm trying, thank you. I'm trying to set an example for them of a mom representing the country, doing good things for them, and to show them what they're capable of doing in this incredible country. I was a combat soldier in the army. These are things that we've been pushing as women. And I'm worried about what's gonna happen in this government. It's gonna be easy to go into elections? I don't think so. They've got quite a big majority, but who knows? It's Israel. They could have formed a government 2 weeks ago, and they didn't. They have issues within how religious this government is going to be in that sense. This is what they're fighting on. What are the level of, I'm trying to translate, like the רף הדוגמה האישית.
Personal example.
Self-example.
The self-example, like how high, because we don't have any test here to be Knesset members, Anyone can elect and anyone can be elected to the Knesset. There's very few of not being a prisoner in jail, That's it. But we need to set an example for our citizens, and what they're trying to pass even before forming the government is to lower that raf, standards. And it's sad. Is this what the Israeli people voted for? I don't think so. So we're fighting these kinds of legislations. I hope we'll have more cooperations than fighting on these kinds of legislation, because Israel deserves a stable government that's doing good things for it. If they do that, we'll be with them. If they don't, we'll try and replace them.
Okay.
Hello, I'm Ilaria Mir. I'm from Italy, from Milano. You mentioned is it working?
Yeah, we hear you.
You mentioned the startup nation. So a question from my heart. Don't you think that the new government that are talking about maybe taking off from some schools, mathematics or English or secular studies, will impact in a startup nation? It will impact on it will, deepen the gap between the technological and the modern part of the state and another, more...
I do think that one of the most important tools is to give children the tools to succeed in the future. This is the job of the education system that we have here in Israel. Give those children tools to do whatever they want to do. And unfortunately, for years now, there are 4 types of education systems in Israel. Some of it work better, some of it less. Most of the education system is a public education system here in Israel. And unfortunately, through the years, they've politicized the education system for the ultra-Orthodox community here in Israel. It means that the 2 main parties hold 2 of the most biggest companies who are running those schools. We've tried to make some changes. There were major changes that were done through the years in order to make sure that they come more prepared to go and do university studies, to go and do experience studies. There's been some advance, and I am quite worried whether this government is going to take us back a few steps. I'll tell you what, what they study, the Gemara, is a brilliant tool of thinking outside of the box. It's brilliant for startups, but they also need to have basic tools to communicate in English, in math, how to do things, obviously. And I think in many ways, the biggest challenge for the ultra-Orthodox community is their representatives here in the Knesset, because they're benefiting from an education system that I would really call even a third world education system that doesn't give those children those extra tools to be successful. And this is the sad stories of that community. Are we going to change that? It's not going to change in the near future. I mean, we had the opportunity last year to do a few. I, as the chair of the education committee, was already prepared to bring bills who would assist that. But unfortunately, this government was dismantled. It's going to take time until we form a government without those representatives in order to do those major changes. And it's important to know, I do think that one of the major, let's call it qualities that make Israel so unique in a startup nation is the fact that, many of us served in the army. It gives you a lot of tools of achieving your goal, of setting something and not giving up. It gives you tools on how to work in teams, you know? You come from so many different backgrounds, from so many different areas, and you're there in this position where you have to watch each other backs. If you're not working as a team, your life are at risk. So your life are dependent on this work team. And this is a kind of tool that is very difficult to gain anywhere else. And so you see all these incredible startups that comes with groups, and they have this tool from the army, and they'll do anything in order to succeed. And they work as a team, and it's amazing to see that. And, you know, some in the ultra-Orthodox community do serve in the army and do get those tools, some don't. It's a question how we deal with it. It's a very complicated issue that has been discussed in Israel for years now. We need to solve it as well. Yeah, it's one of our challenges. Thank you very much. I apologize, but I have to run. I will leave here a few cards. If any of you have any questions also in the future of things that are happening here in Israel, I'll be more than happy to speak to you, answer to you in emails, on the phone. So you're more than welcome afterwards to come and pick it up. Thanks a lot.
Wow. Thank you very much. You know, Sharon Askel, it was remarkable.
Attila, hoz egyet?
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I know, I'm a little upset by this.
Okay, please go back to your seat, please. Our next speaker is already here. Shh, shh, shh. The lady from Milano, Italy. Remind me your name? Ilana. Ah. Hilary. So, in a few minutes, you will have a member of the Knesset from Yehudit Torah, Yitzhak Pinkus. You can ask him exactly your question was, your question was excellent, and you can. לא, אחריך, רגע, שנייה, שב דקה, שב. הוא יהיה עוד יומיים. הוא נורווגי. Okay, as please. Repeat your question again. Okay. חבר'ה, our next speaker, member of the Knesset, Gilad Kariv, from Labour Party, Avoda, oriented and active as a rabbi from the Reform movement. Gilad has been instrumental in promoting the right of non-Orthodox Judaism in Israel and the relations between Israel and the Jewish communities abroad, especially when talking about freedom and worship. And he's also a lawyer, a good one. And as a lawyer, Gilad has also took part in the Knesset Constitution, Law and Justice Committee's discussions over the proposal to write an Israeli constitution. And as you know, in Israel, although we are celebrating 75 years old, we don't have a written constitution yet. So this fact is particularly relevant at this moment with attempts to override certain basic laws in these particular days. And if I may add, Gilad Kariv is a very well-known and got a charisma in terms of debate with the Haredim. So usually, for my previous job as an editor, it was always good for the rating and to have a good show in our studio, to have Gilad Kariv even before he was elected as a member of the Knesset, because he knows how to make the studio and the content in a very high standard of level. Please welcome MK Gilad Kariv to the podium.
מסגרת שעות, לא.
עד מחר בבוקר.
זה נכון. He said that I can do a filibuster. It's actually till the 8th candle of Hanukkah I can do a filibuster. but I promise you that I will stick to the 10 minutes I received to share with you a few thoughts, and then I'll be more than glad to address some questions. Do we have delegates from Argentina here?
Yeah.
Mazal tov. Croatia also, you deserve some applause. If we have people from France,
We do.
משתתף בצערכם, as we say in Hebrew. But you know, actually I'm still a member of the coalition, but in few days from now I will sit on the benches of the opposition, so that's life. And the play and the match continues. Friends, it's really it's a real joy for me to be here with you and to share a few thoughts. In my 30 years of involvement in the Israeli and the global reform movement, I had the privilege to build strong relations with Jewish journalists from around the world. And before I became a member of the Knesset, the first non-Orthodox rabbi to serve in the Israeli parliament, it was clear to me that the dialogue between the Israeli society and the Jewish communities around the world is essential, both for the well-being of the state of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state, and for the well-being of Jewish communities from all denominations around the world. And we are celebrating today Hanukkah. And I don't know if all of you are aware to the fact that the second book of the Maccabees, which is one of the main historic sources to the story of Hanukkah, this book was actually written as a letter from the Jewish community in Israel to the Jewish community in Egypt, asking the Jewish community in Egypt to join the Israeli Jewish community in celebrating this new holiday. And it's amazing to see that only a few years after the victory of Yehuda Maccabee, it was important for the Jewish community in Israel that revived its religious and national autonomy in a way, actually to call a world jury to join the celebration with this basic understanding that in order to fix the holiday, the story, the memory in the Jewish discourse, it's not enough to celebrate it in Israel. And it is interesting also because when we come to the, to the twin holiday of Hanukkah, which is Purim, and from an halachic perspective, those two holidays are twins. We have a strong Talmudic tradition that Purim was founded on the basis of a letter that was sent by Queen Esther to the sages in Eretz Israel, asking them to celebrate or to join the celebration of Purim. So those two festive holidays that we celebrate every year all around the Jewish world, are the two of them are based on the idea that when we celebrate and when we grieve, we needed to do it together. The Jews in Israel and the Jews around the world. And if we neglect one side of this equation, the celebration cannot be full. And in that regard, I think it's not only a nice historic story or a Talmudic story, it's also a message to us here in Israel and to all of you as leaders in your local and national Jewish communities. From the Israeli perspective, from my perspective as a member of the Labour Party, Israel cannot identify itself in a constitutional manner and in a practical manner as the homeland of the Jewish people and as a Jewish and democratic state unless it guards its strong, vibrant relations with the Jewish people outside Israel. And when I'm saying with the Jewish people outside Israel, I mean all segments of the Jewish community. If we neglect the relations between the State of Israel and world Jewry, we undermine the most basic concept of Judaism, that the State of Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people. And by definition, from my perspective, it includes the basic constitutional ideological demand that those relations will be mentored and guarded in their full capacity. And I mean basically that Israel must identify all Jewish communities from all streams and in all countries as equal partners. And any attempt of the State of Israel to differentiate between different Jewish communities on the basis of their Jewish practices and beliefs actually works against this core constitutional definition of the State of Israel as Jewish and democratic. And if Israel as a country is actually pushing back a segment or segments of the Jewish people, Israel is actually undermines its ability to claim that we are the homeland of the Jewish people. And it means that religious pluralism in Israel and pluralistic approach towards the relations between Israel and Jewish communities around the world, this is not something which is nice to have. And it is not only connected to our basic commitment as liberal citizens or as citizens that believe in democracy, it is not only connected to our basic support for the concept of freedom of religion and conscience. And I'm sure that we don't need to explain leaders from communities, Jewish communities from around the world, why we need to protect and to guard this basic democratic concept of freedom of religion. When democracies are not fully committed to this basic liberal concept of freedom of religion, the first communities to be hurt are usually the Jewish communities. And if the State of Israel expects, for example, European countries not to breach the Jewish freedom of religion by imposing, that's yours? By imposing some standards that makes it difficult for Jews to practice their religion, Israel cannot do it unless Israel presents an example of how you protect freedom of religion. Other countries will not trust the Israeli opinion that they should refrain themselves, those countries, from breaching the Jewish freedom of religion if Israel is not protecting the freedom of religion of its citizens. But I'm saying that not only it's a core democratic value, the concept of freedom of religion and religious pluralism, it is also a core element of our Zionist vision. And when you look at the picture of the first delegate of the delegates to the first Zionist Congress in Basel, 125 years ago, you can easily identify the fact that there was, how to say, a full spectrum of Jewish beliefs and life practices represented in that Congress. And from day one, the Zionist movement was built as a wide tent that is trying or is designed to include all segments of the Jewish people. And in that regard, I want to be honest. I have a sincere fear that the next government and the next coalition will work against this fundamental principle of constitutional pluralism and Zionist pluralism. When the next government and the next coalition include major players that are talking about minimizing the scope of the law of return, and canceling the right of grandchildren of Jews to make Aliyah, by definition, from my perspective, it undermines the strength of the Zionist vision. When the next government is considering to cancel the constitutional recognition of non-Orthodox conversions, either only in Israel or also in diaspora communities when it comes to making Aliyah to Israel, it's not only a way to breach and to damage the right of or freedom of religion of Israelis. Again, it's also working against the core Zionist understanding that Israel belongs to all segments of the Jewish people. When instead of celebrating the fact that ultra-Orthodox Jews, modern Orthodox Jews, conservative Jews, Reform Jews, secular Jews identify the Western Wall as a religious and historic cornerstone of our identity, and to celebrate the idea that Jewish families from all around the world and in Israel want to celebrate the bar or bat mitzvah celebrations of their youngsters in Jerusalem, instead of celebrating this fact and promoting the historic compromise that was first designed by Netanyahu and then cancelled because of the ultra-Orthodox pressure, when instead of celebrating this historic compromise, we are trying to push the non-Orthodox communities from the Western world, well, it means that you work against the core Zionist values. Now, you can wave with, statements about the centrality of Jerusalem to Jewish life. You can talk day and night about the importance of protecting the relations between Israel and diaspora communities. But if in the end you are working in order to tell millions of Jews around the world, and it doesn't matter if it's the majority or the minority. In the US, the non-Orthodox denominations are the majority. In many European countries, they are the minority. So what? And if we are the minority all around the Jewish people, which is not the case, but let's say that we are the minority among all Jewish communities, we still talk about millions of Jews. Can the state of Israel, as the homeland of the Jewish people, can afford itself and is allowed to tell those millions of Jews that from our Israeli perspective, you are second-class Jews? That we are not so sure if we want you to make Aliyah? and you hear smart politicians, for example, the next speaker, that will talk again, day and night, about assimilation, but 1 minute after he ends its strong speech against assimilation, he will talk about minimizing the scope of the law of return. From my perspective, I want all families with Jewish origins to find their way back to the Jewish community. Some of them can do it in your communities, and it's great, via conversion process or in other ways. But the Zionist idea is that for many people, the best way to secure the Jewish future of their family is to come and to live in Israel. So our Zionist interest is to make sure that all families around the world with at least one Jewish grandfather or grandmother will find their way to the state of Israel, because by definition, when you are in Israel and you send your kid to an Hebrew public school, and the only holidays you see around you are the Jewish holidays, the risk of assimilation is being minimized. So we need to do a collective effort to bring those families to Israel, not to push them back. And if the next government is changing the law of return, by definition, the next government of Israel is saying we don't care that tens of thousands of families with a Jewish origin will be fully assimilated in one generation. It doesn't work together. It doesn't work together. And in that regard, because we lost the elections, I want to say, and I'm talking from my past experience, that the ability to build a strong dialogue between Israelis and Jews from diaspora communities is crucial in order to block some of those dangerous developments. In the past, in the last 30 years, every few years we faced another political crisis in Israel in regard to conversion legislation. And the reason why we succeeded to block it again and again and again was the strong cooperation between Israelis and Jews from around the world. And here I want to say, and I will conclude with that in order to invite your question and remarks, that we need to understand that it is not any longer about the border between the Orthodox communities and the non-Orthodox communities. Today, and it's important to say it, today this camp that is in Israel and in the diaspora communities that works against a conversion legislation, that works against minimizing the law of return, that works for a more pluralistic approach here in Israel towards the different segments and expressions of Judaism, this camp includes today Reform Jews, conservative Jews, modern Orthodox Jews, and secular Jews. And when the government today in Israel, the next government, is talking about changing the law in regard to conversion, it's not only against non-Orthodox conversions in Israel, it's also against modern private conversions in Israel that are led by some of the most known modern Orthodox rabbis in Israel. But they are not willing to accept anymore the radical extreme approach of the Israeli chief rabbinate towards conversions. And they're enjoying today the legal precedents that we set years ago in the Israeli Supreme Court. And today there are more modern Orthodox private conversions in Israel than Reform and conservative conversions in Israel. And those conversions will be banned too if the legislation is changed.
Really?
Yeah. So we need to build a wide alliance of Jewish communities and Jewish leaders around the world that are holding different approaches towards Jewish law and halacha and different approaches towards the definitions of who is a Jew, but are all committed to this concept that Israel can be defined as the homeland of the Jewish people only if Israel fully respects all segments of the Jewish people. And that's our task and mission for the coming months. I will end here, and if you have comments... Ken.
Please, Kobe, where are you?
Here. Right behind you.
I promise you that you will be the first.
I suggest we'll collect few questions. And
Okay.
Thank you very much for your speech. If you allow, I would like to ask a question.
Can you introduce yourself just to say from...
Yes, of course. My name is Ilgar Khanikov. I am originally from Russia. I am a participant of the Masa Beitat program in Jerusalem now. And I have a question that has been bothering me since I came to Israel a few months ago. It seems to me that the security concerns are a big topic for Israeli citizens as well as for people like me who came here just a short time ago. So I would like to address my question to you regarding security concerns. The Oslo Accords, at the time when they were finalized, seemed to be a sign of hope to bring, finally, at last, to bring peace to this country, to the people of this country. The Palestinian Authority was supposed to be a part of the security mechanism of these accords, and at this time, probably it seemed like a good idea to many people. But now, decades later, we have to state the fact that there are still horrible instances of terror attacks, violence against civilians, and I've been here in this country since September, and there have already been people killed and several attacks. So do you think there should be a point at which the State of Israel declares the cooperation with the PA futile and strives to create a whole new security apparatus, at all?
Okay, I'll address it.
Okay. Another question, yes, please.
I'm Luca Spizzichino from Italy. I'm the director of Atikva, the Italian Union of Jewish Students media outlet. I want to ask you, according to you, the next government will be able to change the rule of law, or in the end, it won't pass?
You're talking about the law of return, or generally speaking about...
The law of return.
Okay.
Last question, this circle, yes, please.
I saw that you invited only men to ask, so I'm putting the veto, and I will invite another question from the lady to my left. Yes.
I'm Dave Gordon. I'm from Toronto, Canada. And one of the things that you said that stood out for me in particular was the concept of welcoming every Jew of every stripe from everywhere in the world. And one of the things that I wanted to particularly pinpoint was that there are tribes, villages, communities in far-flung parts of the world that have called themselves Jewish communities for a very, very long time. You may or may not be familiar with, for example, the Igbo of Nigeria and the Abu Yadaya of, you can clap if you wanted, the Abu Yadaya of Uganda.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering what would it take to embrace them and so many other communities where there possibly could be hundreds of thousands of Jews. Why aren't they being embraced into Israeli society? And why isn't there proactivity on Israel's part, because they could really benefit from their aliyah?
Well, yeah.
Thank you very much for including my question, and I hope you don't come to regret it. and it comes from a place of genuine curiosity in the efforts to, which are very important to protect the rights of religious diversity. You described the Kotel as a religious and historic cornerstone of Jewish identity.
National. Religious and national.
Religious and national. The reform movement in Israel and outside of Israel has gone to great lengths to remove any mention of the Beit HaMikdash, of the Holy Temple, as a part of prayers, as a part of yearning, as a part of what is seen as the ideal for the Jewish future. Given that that is true, please articulate for me why the reform movement, particularly here and in political motives, has chosen the Kotel as such a central issue and does view the Kotel as that cornerstone.
Okay. So, last one? Yeah.
Does this work?
Yeah.
Okay. From the outside, looking into Israel, we've seen Israel going further and further right. As one of the few representatives of the left in government, explain to us what happened to the left in Israel.
You have till, I said I can be here till the 8th candle, right? Look, okay, so I think that there is some linkage between the first question and the last question. So I'll try to go by the order of the questions. And again, I'm you know, like Hillel Zaken, I'm giving, you know, an answer while I'm standing on one leg. So I apologize for not having the time to develop my answers. By definition, we face a great challenge vis-a-vis the Palestinian Authority. And I think that you described you well described the hopes that we had during the 90s to create a mega shift in our relations with the Palestinians, and unfortunately we were not able to implement or to realize our hopes. And in spite my strong belief in a two-state solution, I also identify the Palestinian side as carrying most of the historic blame for this failure. But after saying that, there are two important things to add. One is actually a fact, and the second has to do with our personal and political philosophy. The basic fact is that Israel today has a very strong military cooperation with the Palestinian Authority. If you, and I don't know if you have the chance to meet senior IDF officers tomorrow, but those officers are are saying to us as members of the Israeli parliament, and are saying it out loud in the Israeli media, that the lives of hundreds of Israelis every year are being saved because of the strong cooperation we have with the Palestinian Authority around issues of security. And it is definitely not the time to think about an alternative apparatus for security issues in the territories. In the contrary, and we need to strengthen the Palestinian Authority. We need to invest efforts in order to help it survive this generational challenge that it faces in the next few years. If it's not about the Palestinian Authority, it's about Hamas and the Islamic Jihad. Those are the facts. And Israel has a very strong interest to strengthen the Palestinian Authority. Unfortunately, I think that Netanyahu didn't do it in his former terms. I have a real concern that he will not do it in its coming term. But please keep in mind that Netanyahu never ended the security cooperation with the Palestinian Authority, and Netanyahu never supported any strategic move to take back the authorities from the Palestinian Authority. Right? And that's a fact. It's a fact. I want to add my political analysis that in the end, without a territorial compromise with the Palestinians, and I'm not drawing the borders right now, and I'm not writing the constitution of this political body of the Palestinians, but I'm saying that without a territorial compromise with the Palestinians, Israel will not be able to guard its definition as a Jewish and democratic state. We will have to give up one of those elements. And this is a fact of life. When you have 5 million Palestinians between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River and 7.5 million Jews, in the end, it's either to be all together and to erase the green line in the sense that the Arab citizens of Israel will be in the end a natural part of the Palestinian community, or we create some separation. And a few days ago, we celebrated the 75th anniversary of the November 29th UN Declaration, right? And this declaration was embraced by Ben-Gurion and his followers because they thought it is more important to have a Jewish and democratic sovereignty than holding all the historic territories of Eretz Israel. And yes, there were others, including the father of the next prime minister, that worked hard in order to push back this UN declaration. And from my perspective, the only way to guard the main idea of Zionism, to have a Jewish sovereign state here, is to work slowly and carefully towards a territorial compromise with the Palestinians. I basically agree with you. I think Israel should celebrate the fact that ancient Jewish communities are finding their way back to the wide tent of Judaism and the Jewish people. We need to differentiate between those communities that are truly holding historic Jewish roots and those communities that want to become part of the Jewish people, and that's a different issue. All I'm saying is that right now Israel is not welcoming Jewish communities from the US. We don't need to go to Uganda. The next government is challenging the relations with mega Jewish communities in New York, Texas, and Chicago, Reform and Conservative congregations. Right? And there is a deep linkage between those bad attitudes towards the Abu Yadaya and the bad attitudes towards the non-Orthodox communities around the Jewish world. And the story with the Abu Yadaya started with them choosing the conservative movement for a conversion process. There was another question. Yes, your was about the law of return. Look, I tend to believe that Prime Minister Netanyahu, future Prime Minister Netanyahu, is not really interested in changing the law of return. He also said it. But we need to remember that for different political reasons, Netanyahu is already pushed to the wall by his partners. Now, I'm not saying that it will be an immediate move, but if the coalition agreements, for example, include paragraph stating that a governmental committee will be formed in order to investigate the law of return, it will be the first time that an Israeli government since 1970 is investigating this issue, keeping in mind that it's not about building a committee of Jewish leaders from Israel and from around the world. It's not about building a committee of Jewish leaders from all Jewish denominations and streams. It's not about asking the Jewish Agency and the World Zionist Organization, which are by definition pluralistic bodies, to lead the effort. It will be a committee of the coalition. And we know that at least half of the coalition, including senior members of the Likud, do support the change of the law of return. So it's a real concern. I'm not saying it's an immediate threat, but it's a real concern. About the wall, look, we don't have the time for a long theological discussion. And you know, in 250 years of progressive Judaism, Reform Judaism, you can find, you know, examples for all theological views, the same way you can do it when you examine Orthodox approaches towards Zionism, for example. But it's important to say two things. Yes, the Reform communities don't identify the renewal of the ancient work of sacrifices as one of our religious goals. And from a progressive theological perspective, the state of Israel is the third house. And we are less interested in building a third temple on the Temple Mount as a concrete political goal. From our perspective, the temple, the two temples, were a symbol to Jewish independence and to Jewish religious ability, or the Jewish ability to celebrate our beliefs. And the existence of the state of Israel in that regard replaced this concrete task to build the third temple. It doesn't mean that we are not holding a very strong emotional, theological, and political feelings towards Jerusalem and towards the Western Wall. We identify the Western Wall of the second most holiest site of the Jewish people. The first one is the Temple Mount. But the most known place of worship. When the parachuters freed the Kotel in 1967, they were not only Orthodox Israelis. Most of them were secular Israelis. And still they thought that it's something we should even sacrifice our life for. So in that regard, maybe an Orthodox rabbi is coming to the wall with a very strong desire to see the third temple built on the peak of the mountain. And the Reform rabbi is coming to this same holy place with a different theological desire. My main desire is that Jerusalem will be a city of justice. For me, it's more important than renewing the ancient work of the sacrifices. From a theological perspective, not from a political perspective. Okay, so I'm coming to the Western Wall with this desire. But still, instead of celebrating the fact, look, the greatness of the wall, and it's not our main battle. It's not our main battle. We are fighting for conversions, we are fighting for freedom of religion, for freedom of marriage. You understand that 500,000 Israelis, that most of them are Jews, cannot get married in their own country. You understand? You understand that by definition, all Israeli women are being discriminated in the most difficult moment of their personal life because all divorce processes in Israel are ended to the rabbinical courts. And by definition, by the fact that women cannot be judges in a rabbinical court, it means everything. By definition, the Jewish law, the Jewish halacha, doesn't treat women in an equal manner. That's fact of life. Right? Now, if there are women that want to go through an Orthodox rabbinical procedure, we'll guard their ability to do it. I'm against the American model of separation between synagogue and state. It's not the model that fits a Jewish and a democratic state, but it doesn't mean that you can impose secular Israelis, liberal Israelis, to establish their family life on the basis of the ancient Jewish law. Right? So we have many important battles. You know what was, and it's my concluding statement.
You'll never get anything. Don't forget her. לא, הוא כבר שאל אותה.
No, but that's, look, why? About the future of the left and what happened. After we analyzed the situation of the left in Europe, the Labour Party in France, you know, the Socialist Party in France, and after we'll talk a little bit about the rise of the far right in America, then we'll address the issue of the Labour Party. It's part of a global... Last sentence about the Kotel because it's important. Look, and that's really my last comment. You know why the issue of the Kotel was so important? It was so important not because of the battle. It was so important because we reached a compromise. The real tragedy with the issue of the wall is not that we had, a troubling battle. It is clear that we wrestle around theological issues. But for the first time in the history of Israel, the different segments of the Jewish community here reached a compromise. We agreed to move aside and to establish an egalitarian section without disturbing the routine in the existing section of the wall. We signed an agreement. I'm telling you that the ultra-Orthodox leaders were part of the understanding. I can give you dozens of proofs that they were included in the compromise. And few days after, we celebrated this ability not to agree upon theological decisions. We kept our differences, but we celebrated the ability to bring some peace to this important and holy place. For political small reasons and interests, extreme forces worked to destroy the compromise. And that's the real story of the Kotel. The ability to reach an understanding and the fact that there are those players that don't want us to find compromises. Friends, thank you. Chanukah Sameach.
This is what happened, that we have a rabbi and a brilliant lawyer at the same person. He can talk till Sham.
Cards here. You're always invited.
Please, thank you, Ms. Member. So you see, Rega, don't, please, ladies and gentlemen, don't go. You see, this is something that we can learn from you, you see, because in Israeli parliament, one table, Yitzhak Pindrus from the Haredik party and Gilad Karif from the Reform Party at the same table, it's impossible. It's like to eat a pork in Yom Kippur. So, Okay, maybe the comparison is not good, but this is something that we can learn from you as a Jewish people in the diaspora, how we can deal the conflict in one table with tolerance, with pluralism, and without hostility towards one party to another. But in the meantime, in order that we can prepare a new table with the Haredic representative from the new coalition, it is a pleasure. Where is she? Where is she? Ah, okay. You gave me a heart attack. Okay.
No. Oh, okay. That's something.
In order to, חבר'ה, please, to summarize what we have heard from MKs so far, both sides of the political spectrum, it is a pleasure for me to introduce Tova Lazarov, Deputy Managing Editor of the Jerusalem Post, the most influential Jewish newspaper here in Israel and the diaspora. And she will talk to you about Israel's new government and its impact on the diaspora Jews. We just heard from Gilad Garif, and I must tell you, this is one of the reasons why the Labour Party declined and became so small party in Israel. You know why? Why? Because most of the Israeli society cannot really digest the way that the Labour Party dealing with the conflict outside in terms of the Palestinians, and inside the way that they may think that they are patronize the Orthodox spectrum belief. So Tova Lazarov, she's expert in Israeli politics. I must apologize. I give you because I told her that her meeting is tomorrow, and she came chick-chack right away. That's why she came with jeans, and I really apologize. And please welcome Tova Lazarov, please. The microphone is yours. Thank you.
Not only in jeans, but in a Christmas sweater. So it's sort of, I guess it's kind of like a way to illustrate the point that, you know, when I went to the store, I just saw a pretty sweater with fun colors, and then everybody else said to me, "Oh, that's like Christmas lights. Like that's a Christmas sweater." So here I am with my Christmas sweater and jeans. And if I had, you know, if I were talking to you tomorrow, then I would have covered a lot of the points that, and I'm not actually making this up, that were covered by Shireen Haskell and also by Gilad Kariv. Can people see me, by the way?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Great. I have this fear that I'm like hidden, and behind some huge wall. And so just to save time, although I might back into them, I wanted to actually answer your question. In the purple sweater, can you just tell me your name and where you're from?
My name is Peter Crost, and I'm from South Africa, the South African Jewish Report.
Who knew that this moved? This is great. I love technology. Now I feel much, much better. Yes. So your question is what happened to the Israeli left, right? And without sort of trying to digest how necessarily we got here, I would say there are three things that happened. The first thing is that there was no Palestinian state. At the end of the day, the left was gearing towards a place, right? We were all, when Yitzhak Rabin came into power, so we were already in the midst of an intifada, right? We had an intifada. And not only that, we had also had a massive international threat, which was this whole notion of Zionism equals racism on the UN stage. So we were kind of battling diplomatically on one level, and we were battling physically here. And then there was this notion that we were going to get to this great place, and we would get to this great place. And although it's obviously Oslo wasn't, didn't exist when Rabin came into power, just to show you how far the pendulum has swung. I mean, I didn't look it up before, but I know for sure that he came in with over 40 seats, or at least 40 or something. That's a lot of seats. That's 1/3 out of a 20-seat body. So, we had this whole expectation there was going to be, I don't know how many people here remember that moment on the White House lawn, and we all thought, all right, now peace has sprung, and the left had a reason to say, look, you know, the Zionism and Israelism was rescinded at the UN when we said we were going to go to the Madrid conference. So, like, and things really changed. Like, doors really opened for Israel after that, and the left had a whole reason to say, hey, you know, something might happen here. And then it didn't. It just didn't, right? But when did it not happen? It didn't happen. The year is now 2022. We're going into 2023, right? I came to Israel in April of 2000. So that's like almost 23 years ago, right? And I came thinking, not understanding all the nuance of the details. I actually came thinking, we're gonna head either into one of two places. I say in my brain, we're either going to see the creation of a Palestinian state, or we're going to go in the way of violence. It's going to be one or the other, and it would be kind of great to like be a reporter in Israel and get to cover that. One way or the other, it would kind of be interesting. And so there I came, and what happened was, in fact, we went in the way of violence. And then what happened? But then what happened, of course, is we got Ariel Sharon, right? And if you want to think about that, because he also had massive support. Toward, you know, at one point he also had like a 40, I think, you know, he had 40 he got 40 seats. Likud got about 40 seats. So now you used to have like the 40, and then now you've got that swing, and everyone's like, all right, well now we have a right winger who's not going to do a Palestinian state, and instead he did the withdrawal from Gaza, right? And then he split off from the Likud, and you had Olmert, who was probably one of the more left-wing Israelis, even though he started on the right. And I say that because one of the big differences between, you know, sort of the left, or the more far left and the medium left and the right, is whether, when you talk about two states, is whether you do it based on 67 and you don't do it based on 67. And Olmert was willing to say based on 67, and that put him in the direction of the left. And then, you know, he stepped down because of corruption charges. And then Netanyahu didn't win the election. he got the second number of seats, Tzipi Livni, if you remember. Yeah. And she had a plan, and she was going to push forward in the direction of Olmert, and we were going to get to that 2 states. And then you had Netanyahu. Right? And Netanyahu comes in 2009, and what year are we again? We're 2022, heading into 2023. And we're still talking about Netanyahu, who is going to again be prime minister. So what you have is there wasn't a Palestinian state, and I'll get back to that in a second. And then you had the introduction of a second person into the equation, a second politician to the petition, and that is, we're really in the age of Netanyahu. Right, like him, don't like him, you think he's good, or you don't think he's good. He's the longest serving prime minister, and now that's going to continue. We've been through, I don't know how many, we're on now, was that 5, I think? I think if we had, it was 5 elections, and we're heading into a 6th, and in every election, he really has been, you know, for the most part, the most popular politician. So Israelis love him enough to always hand to him the reins of who would be able to form a government. When he started in 2009, the possibility of a Palestinian state was still very active, right? But other things happened too, okay? Then Obama came into office. The United States, as you know, is the main broker of the peace process, and their vision of a 2-state solution moved away from where Israel was, right? They were never able to successfully bridge the differences between the Israelis and Palestinians. The peace process broke down in 2014 and has never been revived. So it's not even that we don't have a Palestinian state. We don't even have a peace process. We don't even have a U.S. president that is leading a peace process. I think Biden is pro-Israel, I think he's anti-Israel. also doesn't matter. He has not put forward any peace process, even though he is one of the most knowledgeable presidents coming into office on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. He likes to say he has been, every prime minister since Golda Meir. He doesn't need to study notes. He doesn't have to do what other presidents did to sort of get up to speed.
He doesn't know if he's sitting or standing.
Well, either way, as I said, be that as it may,
But he doesn't.
he knows a lot about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, whether he's sitting or standing, and he hasn't done it. So then, okay, right? Did the left put forward a peace process in this election? No, it didn't. The Labour Party, right, which did not necessarily do so well in this election, I think it has 5. I'm going from memory, but if you think about that 40, you can just think about that little drop there. And they held a huge event during the elections, in which they were going to unveil their new diplomatic initiative. They're reviving the days of Rabin. They're going in the footsteps of Rabin, and I want to know what this is about. That's interesting, I say. I think Israel needs to put forward a peace process if it wants to have a Palestinian state. So, okay, what are they about? Where is it, I say to the spokesperson? Is it going to be live streamed? Do I have to go in person? He says, well, not live streamed and not in person. I go, not live streamed and not in person? What are my other options? He says, well, actually, it's closed to the press. It's closed to the press. This is a true story. It's closed to the press, and you can come after. Or in other words, you can talk to us after. We'll put out a press release. So the moment that your remaining major left-wing party, closes its unveiling of its diplomatic initiative for a 2-state resolution to the conflict and closes it to the press, you already know you're in trouble. But okay, you have the head of the major party, Yair Lapid, Yesh Atid, who's like centrist left, right? And he goes to the UN and he says, Israel supports 2 states, I support 2 states. Okay, now he's going to make that a piece of the election process, right? And again, is he unveiling an initiative? Nope, he's just letting you know that in some far-off universe, he would support this. Is he going to go into talks with the Palestinians? Actually, no, he has no plans to sit with the head of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas. So, okay, you have a left, but it hasn't put forward anything. You have the United States, which isn't putting forward anything. What you do have is a lot of politicians who are talking about how there shouldn't be a Palestinian state, and they're playing on what is often the element in the room, is that if you don't have a peace process, then you have I'm going to put in parentheses, it's not a war like Ukraine and Russia, but you have a war process, right? You have a process of violence, right? And that's, you take a look at Gaza, you take a look at the disengagement, you take a look at the growing threat from Gaza of Hamas, right? Once upon a time, they had these little, rockets. They seemed really cute to people. They flew over. They, flew over, a town or two, and they landed on the sidewalk, and everyone was like, wow, the Palestinians made a rocket. Look, it made a hole on the sidewalk. Now, they have very sophisticated missiles that can hit the center of the country. They cause an enormous amount of damage and deaths. It's a real threat, and they're fairly rapid. At some points, they're outdoing the pace of the Iron Dome. When you see them fall, either because the Iron Dome, for some reason wasn't operational, or simply the barrage was so fast, as it has been the case in the last war or two, they haven't actually been able to keep up. So then if you don't have a peace process, you have a growing war process. Who are you at war with? Well, you're at war with your enemy. If you're not making peace with your enemy, then you are making war with your enemy, and who actually is your enemy? So then that becomes the second question. Part of why Netanyahu was able to so successfully win, part of why the left never was able really to hold is simply sort of a conflation of a numbers game, right? So they don't really have a good peace process to launch onto. They have a series of violent events. They're not putting forward anything that's really theirs. They're letting themselves be dependent on the US. And then after that, You have the fact that there's 120 seats in the Knesset, and more of them are going to right-leaning parties than are going to left-leaning parties. So that actually the only unless the left was willing to sit with the Israeli Arabs and the Israeli Arabs were willing to sit with the left, there was actually no chance that anybody who wasn't Netanyahu, and it was always Netanyahu, right, was ever going to be able to form a government. And so as you saw the line as you saw the number of people willing to vote for right-wing parties rise, and you saw the numbers, you know, on the left dwindle, and you saw the number of Israeli Arab, the number of Israeli Arabs rising, right? So that's, they had more seats in the Knesset. Then you came up with an equation where you could only have the right. You know, that's why Netanyahu used, one of his slogans was, it's like me or Ahmed Tibi, who is this Israeli Arab politician, and you'd say, well, he's never going to be prime minister, so what is the choice? He's like, well, if you're not going to sit with him in the government, then you have me, so, you know. And then finally, so then the line of the left moved, it became more centrist, and then you had, and then finally, everybody realized that the way to sort of look at the equation was actually not right or left, but whether or not you supported Netanyahu or you didn't support Netanyahu, whether you thought that Israeli democracy was in danger because he had been in power so long and because he himself was now facing corruption charges, or, you know, whether you didn't. And so then they all got together, including the Israeli Arabs and a number of right-wing parties, and they put together this very interesting, very creative coalition that collapsed, and we went to elections. And when we went to elections, we had a new element, which is that in 2021, not only did we have another war with Gaza, but we also had Israeli Arab riots within sovereign Israel, something that maybe didn't get so much play in the international press. But I don't know how many journalists I have, but if you were here, then you were, you know, probably were observing that. And when you began to talk about the Palestinians as the enemy, and you began to talk about Israeli Arabs as the enemy, if you're not in a two-state solution, if you think that the Palestinian Authority is actually an enemy entity, if you think that the Israeli Arabs are aligned with them, then they become the enemy. Then the lines of who is enemy and who is not starts to run between who is Jewish and who is not. And now you're putting together a government with parties that actually believe that, in a universe, and parties that want to narrow the question of who is a Jew. What does it mean to have a Jewish state of Israel? Who can be citizens in that state? And you're doing it precisely at a time when there's rising anti-Semitism, and the question of who should be able to come here was never more pertinent to the diaspora world at large. That's my answer to your question. Does anyone else have any other questions?
Okay. Please, Tova Lazarov, she will summarize after our last MK. I think.
You want me to stop? I can.
Yes, please.
No problem.
And then you will summarize the whole.
No problem. I'm just going to go sit.
So this is stage one. Now, we are going to have now our last MK member of the Knesset. And as you can see, where is the lady from Milano? Are you ready? Okay. So our last keynote speaker from Yahudit HaTorah, Yitzhak Pindus. He was just recently a member of the Knesset, 24th, I think, and in these coming days or even hours, actually, he will be elected again as a MK of United Torah Judaism Party, Yahudit HaTorah, the Litain side, not the Hasidic, the Litain side. And he grew up in a yeshivot Yerushalayim. He was the mayor of Beitar Illit, which is near Jerusalem. He was deputy mayor of Jerusalem. This was I had the privilege to get to know him. He's a very clever, sharp person, and that's why the Israeli media like him and very much like to interview him. You know why? because he can combine the practical politician network, but also the ideology things. And he's not afraid to say his point of view in terms of halachic point of view, in terms of what is his vision or his party vision towards state-religion relationship. Therefore, the media, either the religion media or the Israeli media, the local media, likes very much to interview our next MK speaker. So please welcome, איך אומרים לעתיד?
Future?
The future MK of the Israeli parliament, Yitzhak Pindus, please. The microphone is yours. Thank you.
Thank you for the introduction, and welcome all to Israel. I'm sorry that told you were clever. They'll figure out in a couple of minutes that you a little bit gave them. And if you're concerned when I'm going to be in MK, so it's 48 hours after the government is informed, and it looks like it's going to be in 10 days from now. So, so take 12 days from now. And I was an MK into the last Knesset, the 24, and hopefully the 25. I'll maybe begin with, generally, Israel went through a crisis, a political crisis for the last 3 years, which seems like it's going to be over. And the crisis is going to be over not because of the amount of voters or because of coincidence of mistakes and numbers that happened, and not really the numbers, because as you all know, it kept on the last elections, the numbers were basically half-half. 50% of the voters voted against Netanyahu, and 50% of the voters voted for Netanyahu. That's basically how Israel is divided in the last years. It's not really left and right. It's not really other issues that you know. And other than that, it's Netanyahu, yes, Netanyahu, no, and that's what's been going on from 2019. And like I said before, almost by coincidence, it ended up being 64 seats to the group of people that said that they agree Netanyahu should be prime minister, and to the group of 56 seats, the group that said Netanyahu should be prime minister. And I'll maybe try to say what we expect in the next coalition, in the next government. What are the main issues that we expect? The first, I would say, main issue that I won't know if it's first, but I would say there's 3 issues. First of all is what has been going on in Israel for the last years is what you know in other places is deep state. And the deep state brings issues of housing, and I don't know how much you're familiar, but in Israel, most of the property belongs to the government. So issue of a crisis of housing doesn't really come from the market. It comes from the government because they own most of the land, okay, through Kakal, through Reshut Mekarkei Israel, but that's one issue. But it brings us to other issues also of problems of cost of living over here. And these are issues that we would want to deal with. And again, that's why I said before that we're talking about yes, Netanyahu, not Netanyahu, because the issues are not really right and left, because you could find a lot of left positions of economy that are very, very strong and they're pushed by this group. Not only our party or Shas, but even in the Likud. Okay, because these issues these are one of the main issues. The second main issue is what I would say also it's the issues of the legal issue, okay, and it's coming up now a lot. The legal issue, which is also some kind of deep state. The relationships between the religion and state are built on political agreements. And that's how it's been from, even before we were in the coalitions, until 77, from 48 until 77, the religious at least the more religious parties were never in the part of the coalition, but the relationships between the state and religion was built on agreements. Almost every issue you touch was built on some kind of compromise of agreements. And what's been happening for the last 10, 15 years, more by court cases that are being sponsored by groups from outside of Israel, okay? All kinds of foundations outside of Israel. These issues are being challenged by the Supreme Court. And I could bring you at least 5 or 6 issues that were challenged by the Supreme Court as saying, okay, this type of agreement of compromise is not a law, because a compromise is not a legal written law, because a legal written law is a legal written law. It says yes or no. I'll bring a small example, okay? If you have transportation on Shabbat in the country, it was built not on a law, it was built on a compromise. So the compromise said one city yes, because over there there's more need of it or for some kind of reason, and one city no. When you bring it into the Supreme Court, so the Supreme Court says, okay, either make a law that you can't have transportation or pass a law that you could have transportation. You can't say here yes and here no. Or an example that everybody in Israel knows now, that one of the things that pushed the government, the last government out, was there was again, there wasn't a law. Hospitals bringing in bread on Passover, bringing in bread on the Passover so the director, the chairman of the hospital used to make a decision who his clients are, which area he serves, who does he serve, and he used to decide, okay, most of my clients that come in are Orthodox or traditional, so I won't let them bring in, I won't let in people that are trying to bring in bread on Passover. I'll tell them no. Areas that most of my clients are secular or non-Jews, why not? Let them bring it in. When it's challenged by the Supreme Court didn't say it's illegal. It said one thing. If you want to have a way not to let in bread on Passover, you have to pass a law in the Knesset. And et cetera, et cetera. I could bring you examples one after each other. And yes, I'll be honest. The trial that Netanyahu is going through brought a lot of the right-wing voters to understand that there is some kind of problem with I would say the operation of the legal authorities in Israel, how they operate. And yeah, now their part is to say, okay, let's tell the Supreme Court, stop interrupting every political agreement, every political status quo. So that's the second issue that's very much now coming in this next coalition. And the third issue, which also, in a normal world, there wouldn't be any difference between right wing and left wing on an issue like that, is the security. And the security today is, and I'm not talking about the national security outside of Israel, with countries outside of Israel, or even with the Palestinians. I'm talking inside Israel, the security. The security issue for each and every resident in Israel, mostly, maybe less in Tel Aviv, but even in Tel Aviv, but of course in Jerusalem, of course in other areas, people are having guns, and not like in the United States that people have it legally, they have it illegally. And the illegal weapons are very much, I'm on my way here, listening to the radio and the news, someone was shot in Nazareth with his 2-year-old baby in the car, which is when they're trying to save now the child, the whole story, how they're trying to save the child. The father didn't survive those shots. And it's just like in a city, a fight between two groups, or not a fight between groups. And most of these weapons are not even legal weapons. Most of these weapons are not legal weapons. These are basically the 3 issues that we're expecting and hoping that after what Israel went through for the last 3 years, that there was no real control, there was no real government that could put out whatever they believe in, these issues will be solved in the next government. And like I said again, the issues of religion and state will be solved by political agreements, political compromises, and not by legal compromises, because legal official laws have compromised. We can't compromise on any halachic issues. The secular won't compromise, of course, on any legal issues. So a compromise has to be a compromise between groups of people that figure out a way how to live together. And that's why it should be that the whole issue of religion and state shouldn't be part of the Supreme Court. It shouldn't be part of their area they're dealing with. It's not an area that could be dealt legally. The deep state in how issues of the financial issues, these issues should be, someone should run it, someone should have the way to run it, to take care of it. The government should be part of the running it, and security should be back into some kind of normal shape. Those are the three issues that we hope the next government, which, like I said before, I believe by the end of next week will be put up
So
in the
there's
Knesset.
many questions for you.
I believe.
MK. So, okay, Kobe, where are you? Ladies first, and then you. Okay, please.
Huh?
אתה תסתדר, ברור. You can handle it. No problem.
Okay.
Okay, hello, I'm from Italy, from Milano. My name is Ilaria. And I wanted to know, since I think your party too wants to take off from ultra-Orthodox schools, secular studies like English, right, like math, don't you think it will impact to the startup nation? I'm asking you this, now it's something I add, like, as before, because I have spoken 2 weeks before the Israeli election with a high-tech man, Israeli high-tech man. He told me, if this happens, if these parties go to the government, many, many people of the high-tech world will leave Israel.
Okay. Another question, please. ניקח שניים, שלושה ביחד. Okay, please.
You're the boss.
Oh, no, אתה לא רואה?
The theory of deep state is based on the idea that there's some kind of secret power running things. The Supreme Court is not a secret power. It's an independent branch of government. And it's a fundamental principle of democracy that the court should be independent from the legislature.
Okay.
If you are prepared to have a Knesset majority overrule ruling of the Supreme Court, does that mean you do not believe in the democratic principle of the separation of the judiciary and government?
I'll answer that question.
Okay, the last one for this circle, please.
She actually asked similar questions.
This lady, please. Kobe, Paul.
I come from France, Radio Shalomit Dijon, and I'm also elected in France. And I'm very sad of what I've been hearing here. And it seems to be that Israel is imploding from the inside, or imploding because no one can get peace inside, or security, or legal works, or maybe from the outside, Israel will be said to be racist if you are beginning to say that someone is Jewish and someone is not Jewish. It's just terrible for me.
Okay, so let's allow Mr. Pindus to answer for these 4 questions, please.
Okay, I'll start with the middle question, and I'll go back to your question and then to your question. I'll start with the middle question. You're absolutely right if it would work normal in Israel, okay? In a regular democracy, you can't say the court is a deep state. What are you, you're insane? It's part of democracy, right? You have The parliament, right? You have the court, right? You have the police. Things, they have the government. Things work like in a democracy. But as Israel, I have to tell you, it's the only country in the world, that basically by the end of how the whole game works, the judges, they're the ones that appointed judges, okay? Ayelet Shaked tried to change a little bit on the edge of it and made some kind of cosmetic fixes. But by the end of the day, it's one group for 70 years. One small group, right? And part of them are even family that make sure their judges get it to be their judges. It's the only country, I checked it. And I asked the Knesset, the people of the Knesset that investigate, to find out if there's one more country in the world that it works like that. And I'm not saying every country has their problems. I'll talk to an American journalist, they'll tell me, listen, how it works in America, it's crazy. The president puts, and you know that the Republican get the majority one time, and sometimes the Democrats get the majority. It doesn't work. It's not supposed to work like that. I agree. And the French that have also their ways of saying why it doesn't work. The only place, okay, that it works like that is in Israel. And why is it a paradox? Because Israel does have a major problem between, and the last question was about it, between a Jewish democratic state, okay? There is some kind of balance between Jewish democratic state. Now, if you want to find a way how to deal with an issue like that, you don't take someone that represents only the democratic value, and the person that represents the Jewish value is not part of it. When I want to tell you something, the majority of Israel, okay, and I include the Muslims inside, are a lot more Orthodox. And when I'm talking about a majority, I'm talking about 70, 80%, because the traditional people say it again and again when they vote. They want to be this country be a lot more traditional. The Muslims want this country be a lot more traditional. So you're taking a small minority that they have their values and they make the decisions alone. So if they would be clever enough, like until Aaron Barak, they would say, yes, we as a Supreme Court, in issues that are politically not out, we're not going to interrupt. Nothing's going to happen. And Israel was a democracy 20 years ago also, okay? And 25 years ago also. When Shamgar was in the Supreme Court, Israel was still a democracy. As much as I know, maybe I don't know enough history because I didn't learn enough of secular studies. But Israel was a democracy 25 years ago too, okay? And even before Begin was a democracy, okay? Who made strong, were a democracy. They weren't. They were a democracy. And what they're trying to do is they're taking a small group from one university and they're deciding between issues that are issues that we have to get some kind of compromise. They're saying, no, don't make a compromise. You have to make it legal, yes or no. Okay, so that's what unfortunately, we don't want to do it, but unfortunately that's what we'll have to do. And like I said, the majority wanted more Orthodox, and it includes not the 64, another 10 Arab members of Knesset. So we're talking about 74 that want it differently. Okay, and a vote to put in chametz into the hospitals, you could get up to 75 votes in this house today, and not 64 tomorrow. Why challenge it? And then you have the minority television say, you guys are making this place Orthodox. No one wants to make this place religious. We're just saying, leave the compromise how it works. And I'll go back to the question of the secular studies. I want to tell you, there's a lot of things that aren't true, okay? Fake news, how they like to call it some places in this place. No one is trying to bring down or change the schedules of the schools. That's not the issue. The issue was one. There was an agreement made in 2003 because in Israel, it is a weird system, okay? But private schools are funded by the government. And the private schools are funded by the government by the percentage of the math and English, okay, and other studies that. And that's the way of doing it, and that's the agreement. The way you go down, the less you're sponsored, okay? If you go, you teach only math, you get to 55%, okay? You teach math and English and you're private, you get to 75%. What happened in the last 10 years is they started counting the 55% if prices of 1995, okay? So it ended up being, instead of 55%, 20%, and instead of 75%, 40%. An example, what you just said now, private schools that teach 100% of all the studies that they have to be studying, instead of getting 75%, they're getting 40%, right? Officially, they're getting 75, but at prices of 95, 96, and they're giving you all these. So what we said is one thing. The agreement is 55%, count the 55% real. They get 75%, the 75% be real. And then what do? How do you stop it? How do you make a whole political issue out of it? You say, no, they're trying to get out of the schools. It's not true. There is schools that learn less. Yes, the schools that boys, mainly boys, less girls, that want to keep the tradition. I'm reminding all of us, the reason we're here in Israel, okay, is because of God's promise in the Bible. If we don't believe in God's promise in the Bible, we have no right to be here. My parents had no right to get on a plane and come here. They were supposed to stay in the United States. What are they doing here, right? Well, what are you coming to the Middle East? They're not from the Middle East. They're from the United States, right? And the same thing is all my friends and my colleagues. Our right is because of our tradition. We want children, a certain percentage of our children, to study the Bible studies, and we put them over there. And then we're saying, yes, don't sponsor them more than 55%, because they're studying only math on a low level. So please don't sponsor, but the 55% should be 55%. That's the issue. I, of course, agree that an owner of a company of high-tech says, I read in the newspaper they want to stop now in all the schools studying math. Wow, that's going to bring a disaster into my company. So I want to assure you that we're doing a lot of projects in the community, okay, mainly with girls, to higher the level of studying in math, to higher the level, and I was involved in it a lot, and higher the level of studying in that. And now I want to respond to the last question. I think it's racism. Because if you tell, okay, a person from Ukraine, you can't come to Israel, but if you had a Jewish grandfather, you could come to Israel, that's racism. Okay, so make your decision. If you're saying anyone that wants to come could come, it's okay. If you want to say you want, because of Jews to come, say Jews to come. To come with a law, and that's the idea, and say no. Only if one of your great-grandfathers was Jewish, I would expect that most of the world would get up and say, you guys are racist. Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions?
So, I think I would like to thank Mr. Pindus for his courage, because he, no, really, because he came and he knows that he's in a minority, okay? Most of the journalists, especially...
I grew up like that, it's okay.
You grew up with, okay, so I think it's only a beginning. All I suggest as a moderator, Mr. Pindus, that please, because you know that there is a lot of afraid from your from the new government, especially from your party, please, let's look at it as a start of a dialogue and be willing to listen to the people from the diaspora and to learn from their fearing about the future. So I would like to thank Mr. Pindus, who came specially to meet you, because it's not a halachic, to light the candles for Hanukkah on time. So thank you very, very much for your time.
Thank you.
Listen. We are going now straight ahead to a special dinner with the chairman of the news agency at the Friends of Zion Museum. So please take your seats for the bus right away to the museum. I would like to emphasize one thing before we will leave. Tomorrow, it's a tour meeting. It's a special, very special day. Therefore, you need to be on time. Those who are going to the south, 8 o'clock, the bus moves to the south of the border.